Let us bring out the artist in you. If you'd like to learn how to paint or improve your painting, the SAA is here to inform, encourage, and inspire you every step of the way. When you become an SAA member, you get so many benefits, including the free bi-monthly newsletter Paint, packed with inspiring step-by-step projects, fascinating articles, and detailed information to get your creative juices flowing. Discounts on over 13,000 art products featured on the SAA website and in the Home Shop catalogue, with free order line and free delivery in the UK mainland. A devoted SAA team on hand to answer your questions and give you the confidence and motivation you need to start painting and develop at a pace that suits you. Plus, a free welcome pack filled with gifts and practical help to get you started, as well as the opportunity to make friends with like-minded people.
Best thing of being a member is the inspiration for the magazines, to be able to purchase things at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, you get the reduction on all the materials, the advice you get.
I can shop from home.
It's a community.
It seemed like a very friendly sort of organisation.
If somebody's thinking of joining, don't spend too long thinking. Just join. They'll love it.
Good morning. I'd like to thank all of you for coming by this morning to experience this wonderful exhibition and hopefully an acceptable demonstration. That remains to be seen. I'd very much like to thank David and all of the people who have made this exhibition possible, all the volunteers, to our driver, to everyone who's been so welcoming and supportive of not only the exhibition, but us individual artists as well. We're all very, very pleased to be here. I would like to take just a moment and introduce someone to you, if I may. Mr. Jidan Chen, who has two wonderful paintings in the show and is here all the way from Shanghai for this event. We all owe a great deal because in 2010, he was the founder and the sponsor and the organizer of the Shanghai Biennial, which was the first international show that really attracted attention of artists all over the world. And overnight, everyone came to the conclusion that they needed to have an international presence. And before that, everything was very local. And it was Jidan Chen who made that possible. And he is standing right back there. And I would like to... Were it not for him, we would not be standing here today. I'm going to do a scene. I'll show you the photograph that I'll be working, or that was the initial inspiration for this. This is a scene that is very typical in the Midwestern part of the United States where I come from. And I was intrigued by basically the shapes in this building, and I thought it was a basis for doing a painting. My idea was not to simply reproduce the photograph, however. I feel that as a painter, you need to add something to it. So what I would like to attempt to add to this image is a sense of atmosphere, a sense of time, a sense of place, and add a little drama to what is an otherwise mundane scene. And the way that I do that is by the application of value being from light to dark, from the white of the paper to the darkest pigment that we have. And on my palette, that's lamp black. I'm going to be talking a great deal about value because I think it's so important to painting. So what I am going to be talking about today is the 9-value system, which is just an arbitrary system, but it's a way to give us a vocabulary to discuss value and with a common understanding. From the white of the paper to lamp black, a graduated wash going from lightest to darkest. When you divide that graduated wash into thirds, you have light, middle, and dark. And if you divide the thirds into thirds, you have light, light, middle light, dark light. You can figure out the rest. And if you number that, it's 1 to 9. So as I'm talking, I can say at this point, I think I might want to change this value from a value 3 to a value 7. And we have a common understanding, okay? So what I am going to do now, as you can see, I've hedged my bets just a little bit, mainly because of the time constraints here, because we've got a lot of information to get through in 50 minutes. I have created a scene, drawn a scene on the paper here that has a very distinct background, and that would be, in this case, the sky, a very distinct, a very defined middle ground, which would be the building, and a defined foreground. I'm going to distinguish between those three segments of the painting by using value. So in my background, I've decided to use light values. Those would be values 1 through 3. In the middle ground, in the building, I'm going to use dark values. That would be values 7, 8, and 9. And then in the foreground, I'll use the middle values, 4, 5, and 6. So we get a definite break, a distinction between what is close, what is in the middle, and what is far away. Sometimes that distinction gets lost, and then the illusion of depth goes with it. So we will begin in that which is the farthest away. I would like to pre-wet the paper just a bit for a variety of reasons. It makes the area more susceptible to paint. If there are any problems with the sizing, or if you've got fingerprints all over it from doing your drawing, this will sort of even the surface of the paper. It'll make it just a bit more receptive to paint. And the other reason I do this is that a sky is atmospheric. It's miles and miles and miles of atmosphere. It's not like a solid backdrop. You can't walk up to the sky and knock on it. So if you paint it with too much texture, too much evidence of surface, you will lose that illusion of distance and depth. By pre-wetting the paper there, it will diffuse the pigment in a way that I think replicates atmosphere. Now, in the background, I would like to use a light value warm wash, because I know that the way that I use paints, the rest of the painting is going to be relatively cool. So I want to keep it in that light value range, and I would like it to remain in the warm values. So I will begin with yellow. I guess that's about as warm as it gets. And I have to be very mindful that I don't get too much pigment on the paper, because it is possible to get even yellows and oranges up into that middle value range if you're not careful, and then you lose some of the potential for distinction. Excuse you. Now, my brush is loaded with yellow. I have a big puddle of yellow on the palette. It would be very easy to just continue to use that yellow, but you always have to be aware that you do not ever want to bore the viewer. So I think if I can change up that yellow just a little bit, add a little bit of orange to it, no one will ever comment on that, but I think on some level they will be appreciative of the fact that I didn't use the same yellow throughout. Ed Whitney, the great watercolor teacher, said that predictable is boring. And as soon as you start doing the same thing for too long, people start second guessing you, and then they lose interest. Now, I have a warm light value sky. How can I make that seem even warmer? And I'll answer my own question. I'll say by putting in just a bit of complementary color. And the complement of yellow is purple, so I will take a little bit of purple and suggest another value. Now, what's the right percentage? I think the ideal percentage in this case is 80-20. So if I'm 80% warm and I infuse the sky with 20% cool, the cool has the potential to make the warm appear warmer, and the warm will make the cool appear cooler. 70-30 works. 60-40 is too close to the dreaded 50-50, where you lose your sense of dominance. Now, to get this atmospheric look that I'm after, I don't want surface texture, I don't want hard edges, I want very diffuse light. And a tool that I have come to rely on to accomplish that is this brush right here, which is called a Hake brush, H-A-K-E. I use it dry on the surface of the paper, and I use it to diffuse the paint. And I think you can see what that does. And I hope this is coming across on the camera, but I am very, very subtly blending these colors by whisking very lightly using this Hake brush. I never paint with this brush. I only use it as I'm using it right now. It also redistributes the pigment and the water on the surface in such a way that you don't have to worry about back bleeds and oozles and all the things that water will do sometimes on its own. Ed Whitney, again to quote Ed Whitney, said, "Water and pigment left to their own devices will do beautiful things." And we all know that, because when we first lay down that initial wash, watercolor is never better. It glistens, it glows, it's fresh, it's spontaneous. And then we all have to go in and fix it just a little bit. And that's when we start having problems. So the less you can do with these washes, I think the better off you are. Let the water and the pigment do the beautiful things they're capable of doing. And this, I think, enables that process to occur without too much interference from me. All right, so I've established my background now. This is the distance. The next thing that I need to go into is the middle ground, the building, which I said I would like to be in the dark values. So, what's a dark value? Well, watercolorists have many different opinions about what dark is. Many watercolorists are under the impression that middle values will suffice as dark. We are sometimes accused of being a wishy-washy medium, and it's because of how we use value and our reluctance to use darks. Most people are very, very skilled on the light value. They're very skilled in using white, very aware that you need to preserve white. And as they start working up values, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, now you're starting to see a little bit of strength, a little bit of value, and a lot of people stop at that point and ignore the dark values, 7s, 8s, and 9s. One of the reasons is we have all been given bad information at some point where we were told never use black in a watercolor. If you use black, it will stand out. It won't integrate with the rest of the painting. That's incorrect. If you use a value 9, the way to get it to integrate is to surround it with value 8s. If you surround your value 8s with value 7s, surround your 7s with 6, now we're back into everybody's comfort zone. So I will be adding a very substantial dark to this part of the painting. But before I do that, I need to address something that I did prior to the demonstration here. And that is I masked off some of the areas of the painting. What possibly looks in the camera as paint, light value, is not. It's masking tape. I much prefer that to masking fluid. And there are several reasons for that. I'll show you one of them right now. When I did my first instructional DVD, I used masking tape. I recommended masking tape, and people started writing me saying, what kind of masking tape should we buy? And my answer was, don't go to the art store. My apologies to SAA. Go to the hardware store, go to the lumber yard, where you can get what would be priced at $40 at the art supply store for $6. You want just plain old 2-inch masking tape. The reason is it's very sticky and it masks very effectively. The other reason is you can see through it. So if you have a very intricate shape you need to mask, you can see the line through the tape. So I've just drawn a very intricate rectangle here. Not really, a simple rectangle. And I'm going to use another tool now called a snap cutter. Once again, you go to the hardware store and you ask for a snap cutter. This is what they will give you, or they will give you a plastic one. Very, very inexpensive, but a wonderful tool because the blade is flexible. It transmits a lot of information from the paper to your hand, so you don't run the risk of cutting through the paper. When the blade tip gets worn, you take off this little plastic end, you insert it in the slit, and you give it a snap, hence the name. You now have a brand new fresh point. When the blade is all gone, you go back to the hardware store and buy 3 more. So, well, the question was, oh, and by the way, I encourage questions. I'll be more than happy to entertain questions as I go. Question was, are you afraid that you will cut the paper? And the answer is no, I am not. Because of the design of this blade, I can feel where the tape ends and where the paper begins. And people question that, but in workshop situations, people find they're able to do this the first time they try with no problem at all. So you can mask very, very, very effectively. We did have one workshop where there were 2 ladies in the same workshop who actually cut right through the surface of their paper. That had not happened before, nor has it happened since. But as the week progressed, we realized there were other issues at work there. So, now, we got to get moving. I'm going to create a dark value here, and I'm going to use 2 combinations, 2 of my favorites, and consequently I put those pigments side by side in my palette. One is phthalo green, which is the only green I have on my palette. I categorize all the other greens as bilious. A lot of artists say they just can't deal with green. It's because they use the yellow greens. Phthalo green is a very cold green. If you want a warm green, you can add yellow. You can make your own. It blends well. It is a staining color. But when mixed with alizarin crimson, you can get a very, very deep, solid dark. If you wanted a cool dark, you go a little heavy on the green. If you wanted a warmer dark, you go a little heavy on the alizarin. So, now when I said dark, I meant dark. And I know that sometimes people that are unused to painting in the darker values gasp when they see this, but it is a very, very effective tool to use all the value that the paint companies have given you. When I jury and judge art shows, I have come to the conclusion over the years that more paintings fail or succeed based on the artist's use of value, more than drawing, more than color choice, more than any other aspect. I think it's value. We all need to know more about value so that we can improve our use of value. Now, I'm not concerned if there are textures appearing on the surface of the building, because this is a building, it's not sky. If I can differentiate between the two, I think that's a good thing, because that'll give more credibility to the building and more credibility to the sky. There's a lot of ways to create texture, but I think as long as it's random, it's probably okay. Now, normally in my studio, it takes me about a week to finish a painting. And much like Ali Abbas, I feel that I'm at a real disadvantage having to have time constraints. But I also realize that for you to sit and watch me do one of my paintings would be cruel and unusual. It truly would be watching paint dry. So since this process needs to have a modicum of entertainment value, I'll have to try to keep it moving here. And as I say, any questions you have, don't hesitate.
Do you use just one brand of paint?
I do now. I have tried all the paints out there. They all have qualities to recommend them. Your job as an artist is to find the pigment that works best for your style. There is no universal answer. There is no universal paint that everyone should have. And you just have to experiment until you find the one that is good for you. I am currently using Daniel Smith pigment because at the last Shenzhen biennial, I received a and I found out what they do is they send you a complete set of Daniel Smith paint, one tube of every color. And I called the rep up and I said, you know, I'm sorry, I don't feel right monopolizing $4,000 worth of paint, knowing I'm not going to use it. And, the lady, Catherine Smith, said, what colors do you use? And they sent me $4,000 worth of my 20 colors. So I am now a Daniel Smith proponent. And I have calculated I need to live to approximately 150 before I run out of paint.
John, we have a question from somebody watching at home. They want to know, when you paint as dark as this, do you then use like white paint to stand up against it?
No, I am a transparent watercolorist. And when I first began painting, I did use gouache, but usually as a fixer-upper. When something had gone horribly wrong and I couldn't figure out any way to correct it, I would go to opaques. So right from the start, in my mind, using opaques in watercolor was somehow a violation, and that I made it my goal to be able to do everything I need to do using transparent pigment. It was sort of a personal challenge. I think I grew because of it. And as a result, now I am committed. I try to do everything transparently without resorting to gouache. However, some of my very favorite painters in the world, Joseph Zbukvik being one, uses gouache so effectively that I sometimes wonder if I should rethink my stance. But for now, at least, I'm committed to transparency. All right. I'd like to now go to another combination to create a dark on the same theory that I said before, is that predictable becomes boring. So I'll go to my second favorite, which is ultramarine blue. And you'll notice I have my alizarin and phthalo side by side. I also have ultramarine blue placed next to burnt sienna, because the two blend very beautifully. There's red in the alizarin, or excuse me, in the ultramarine. There's red in the burnt sienna, and when they come together to make a gray, it can be a beautiful purple gray. Another combination is ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which is more of a brown rather than a reddish brown, and that gives you a subtly different value as well. So, for the remaining dark passages, and I want some distinction. Some distinction between my initial darks and the ones that I'm going to drop in now.
Ian watching at home says, if you don't live to 150, he'll have your extra paint.
Please ask Ian to leave his address and contact information. I do have a living will, and I will make a note. Ian. My wife, Kathy, who is right here, by the way, we had the opportunity to live in Scotland for a year. I taught in an exchange teaching program. While we were there, we were sworn to use Scots to help in any situation where it was required. So as a result, I'd like these two gentlemen right here to come up. Let's dry this just a little bit. They're going to provide a valuable service for me. And they're going to remove the bandages, as it were. So they're going to take off the masking tape now. While they do that, it is literally like watching paint dry to watch me remove masking tape. So they're going to do their thing, and I'll answer a few questions right now while they do that. So I hope you have some.
We do have a question asking about what types of brushes you like to use.
Well, I taught art in the public schools. We had a supply catalog that we could order student grade materials from. This brush cost approximately $1.29 back in the mid-'80s, and I have used it since. The ferrule fell off immediately, so that's held on with masking tape. It was really the cheapest of the cheap at the time, but over the years now it's gotten progressively dirtier, and it's gotten more snap, and it holds its shape very well, so it's become a favorite. This is a brush that is a very expensive brush, and I think the first week I had it, the ferrule fell off this one again too, but I glued it back on. I'm using it right now because I need a brush this size. Other than merchandise awards, my brushes are just junk. They truly are, but they work fine for me. Once again, as an artist, what you need to do is find the equipment, the tools that fit your hand and enable you to do what you want to do, what you need to do. So that's your job to find those things. Don't go to magazine articles and read articles about the only 6 brushes you'll ever need, because what you're reading about is the only 6 brushes that artist would ever need. You need to find those yourself. Same with paper. I use Arches 140-pound paper. I got a merchandise award once for 25 sheets of 300-pound paper, which I used. I loved it. I liked the way it handled. I liked everything about it. But when those were gone, and I was faced with the reality of $5 a sheet for 140 pounds or $13 a sheet for the 300-pound, I also decided that 140-pound is very adequate to my needs. And it truly is.
20 minutes left, John.
Okay.
Does masking fluid leave a residue behind when you remove it?
Question is, does masking fluid leave a residue behind? No, it should not. The reason I choose not to use masking fluid very much is I think it leaves a characteristic mark.
What about tape though?
Tape does not. I think if you left it on too long, it might. When you buy your tape, go someplace that sells a lot of 2-inch tape. If you go to the hardware store and they have one roll of 2-inch tape and they have to brush the dust off, don't buy it, because the longer it sits, the more problems you'll get with residue. But if you get fresh tape, it'll be fine. I've never had a problem. But we should ask my tape experts here if are you having problems with the tape?
Just a small part.
Only because they've got no nails.
Ah, nail biters. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. All right, now, my plan here for this scene is to do a rainy day. And I'd like to show you a reflective street surface, if I could. Because I think as watercolorists, we need to have a large bag of tricks so that we're prepared for any situation that arises. And I don't know, do you ever have rainy days here? Well, this will be a good technique. So, in keeping with that, if it's raining, these roofs would be wet also. So, I'd like to create that effect if I could. So, I'm going to wet the roof surface once again. And then I'm going to add a reflection. And the reflection will be of this building here. I'm going to avoid a little swatch here, which will be a reflection of this stovepipe. So, reflecting the sky, reflecting the building, and to ease that transition, to soften that edge, I will use my hockey brush. Here we have a structure up above that will cast a reflection, so I will indicate that. Now, I can't see anything in the monitor. Does that look like wet, reflective surface? Good.
I have another question for you, John.
Yes?
Ian again wants to know, I guess if you didn't paint in watercolor, what other mediums would you like to have a go at, and do you paint in?
I would probably paint in oil painting, oils. That's what I started. I was trained in the 60s as an abstract expressionist. Painting large canvases in oil. I loved it very much, but once I discovered watercolor, I found it's a cruel master, and I've felt ever since I cannot take time away from the watercolors because I need to devote all the time I possibly can to the medium. And I think that most watercolorists are watercolorists, first and foremost. And when I talk to someone and say, what medium do you work in? And they say, oh, I work in all the mediums, I'm immediately suspicious. I suspect that there's somehow lack of depth there. I also like to say that as watercolorists, we are very challenged in that we don't have white. We have to rely on the white of the paper. So as we are painting, we are continually thinking both positively and negatively. The shapes in between the shapes we create are just as important as the positive shapes. Intellectually, that's quite challenging. It's a lot to have to keep track of. And so what I have determined over the years is that people of superior intelligence are drawn to the watercolor medium. All others go to the other choices. All right. Basically, I have the structure of the building in place. I would like to move down now to the wet, reflective street. Again, just like the sky, I'm going to pre-moisten it a bit. Did I sense a question?
Where you take the tape off here, this light blue.
Yes.
Where it seeps through the
No, the question was where the tape was removed, there's some light blue. That I painted in first and taped over it. Because, again, with the time constraints, for me to take the time to paint in these small bits would be, well, it'd be bad television, wouldn't it? All right, a lighter surface here reflecting the sky. I would like to do the reflection basically in the same colors as the objects being reflected, but change the values a bit. Now, shadows generally are diagonal. Reflections go straight up and down, and that's how you distinguish between the two. So I have to be very careful to make sure that my shadows actually do go straight up and down, that they don't start listing. The other thing I need to do is be mindful to get some variation, some variance All right, now there are some posts here that will also need to be indicated as reflections. This is the time to do it. When it's slightly wet. And then, again, with the hockey brush, to create this wet, glistening surface. I tend to use neutralized colors. I gray out my colors with complements, but occasionally it's nice to put in a strong accent color. This is a 50-gallon drum sitting on the loading dock here. So if I use that as an indication of some bright color, I would also like to indicate that that is reflected on the street. Another thing that I can do now is paint negatively. In other words, I can do some lifting. And for that, we create a thirsty brush. You wet the brush, you dry out all the available moisture, and then you simply use it to pick pigment off the surface. So I have the opportunity to have these light value posts be reflected in the street as well. All right. Need to knock down this signage just a bit. We want to retain the shape, but we don't want it to be too assertive. Basically what I'm doing now is I'm going around and I'm killing the whites wherever they occur that I don't want them to be. When I was a student studying with my initial teacher, a gentleman named Ching-Ki Chi, he used to go around as we were finishing our paintings and he would point out all these little areas where we had accidentally left pieces of white showing. And you don't want to do that because white is such a powerful element. You don't want to waste it on unimportant parts of the painting. So he would come around and he would point and he would say, kill the whites, kill the whites, kill the whites. And then someone said to him at one time, Mr. Chi, that sounds a bit racist. So I don't know what he changed it to after that, but the concept still stands. You want to get rid of those incidental pieces of white because they'll attract the viewer's eye. Now, we're going to go to the stage I like to refer to as calligraphy, and that's the addition of line work. Again, when I was a student, someone asked Ching-Ki Chi, why do you always paint the telephone poles and the utility poles and all of those kinds of very pedestrian things? And he said, what your job as an artist is to make them beautiful. He said, I look at it as the addition of calligraphy.
Just push your board towards you a little bit, John. You're disappearing at the top of the screen. Beautiful, thank you.
In the heat of passion. Now, the addition of calligraphy can do some very, very interesting things to your painting because it's linear, it's delicate. You can create a sense of movement and direction that is in contrast with the solidity of the building, of the architectural forms. So it provides a nice stylistic contrast. And it's a way to reintroduce line back into our scheme of things. Now, there's one question I know you're all dying to ask me, and no one has dared do it yet, so I'm going to answer it for you. And the answer is no, I did not vote for him. Okay? You can tell that I didn't, huh? Well, I'm proud if that's the case. Now, there's almost no limit to the amount of calligraphy you can add, and it tends to be quite effective. I forgot to do a little last moment reflection there. And you can see the delicacy of the lines is a very nice contrast. I also like to add some of these back into the street to recreate a bit of surface. Now, I've very carefully arranged for this scheme to have an area that's subtly more important than the rest of the painting, and that's where we'll put in a center of interest. And my favorite definition of center of interest is from Norman Rockwell, the illustrator, who said, if you're having trouble deciding on what you need for a center of interest, he said, put in a puppy. He said, if that doesn't work, put a Band-Aid on the puppy's leg. Now, in my center of interest, I think I need to put something, because I've told everyone, look here, and then they're all going, yeah, so okay. We'll put in a figure. When I was in college, we had to do quick studies in figure drawing, which none of us liked. We all wanted to get on to a more serious drawing. We were doing gesture drawing. I did not realize at the time how critical that is, because if you get the gesture right, the viewer will put in belt loops and eyelashes and all that stuff. So, it's an indication of a figure. Now, is he coming or going? That is entirely dependent on where I place the head. If I have the head situated so the chin drops down in front of the shoulders, he'll be coming toward us. If I have the bottom of the head obscured, he'll be going away. Whoop! I meant to give him a hat. Well, that's a big hat. Sort of a sombrero, that's right. That's right. Well, this is what happens on live TV. All right, there we go. Now, he also deserves a reflection. In theory, his reflection should be as diffused as the other reflections, but because he is the center of interest, we're going to cut him a little slack and let him stand out. People ask, should the reflection be darker or should it be lighter? I'm not a physicist. I don't really know. What I say is that it probably should be different. Now we've got to put that damn sombrero back. Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm from America. I can call him a cowboy, I guess.
Last minute then, John.
Boy, I tell you, came out pretty good. Not the painting, the timing. I wasn't too worried about the painting, but the timing to get all this done. All right, one last thing. I have some birds in the sky. It's a little wet. I don't want to take them out right now. I do have one last quick thing to show you. This will probably be, we'll fade on this. This is a tool called the Mouth Atomizer. This is a way to recreate value and color without disturbing what has gone before. And my wife always accuses me of overusing the Mouth Atomizer. So I'll show you how that works. All right, there it is. Any questions? I'm going to declare it done. Thank you. You are a wonderful audience. Up next will be Mark Mahaffey, but depending on how much time Mark needs to set up, I'd be happy to answer a couple more questions, even though it won't be going out to the folks at home. So.
Can